Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Iran's security chief says it's prepared itself for a long war with the United States. As U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth claims, we didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. And global oil prices have risen as Iran continues to launch strikes across the Middle East. Iran's security chief has said it's ready for a long war as it targets energy sites across the Middle East. Meanwhile, the UN nuclear watchdog has said there's no indication Israel and US attacks on Iran have hit any nuclear facilities. For more on this, I'm joined by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. Jason, great to have you on the show. So the US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, gave us an idea of what drove America to carry out the attack on Iran. And it was what he says, the fear of nuclear weapons. How justified is this reasoning? And was there an imminent threat from Iran?
Well, it's great to be with you. I think the Iranian regime has been at war with the United States since 1979. And that's a reality that many members of Congress and U.S. policymakers have really failed to appreciate and attend to in a very comprehensive manner until this new administration with President Trump in his second term has taken risks that no other American president has taken and ended the era of American self-deterrence against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think the president and his administration should be applauded for that. And I think that that's what the Defense Secretary was getting at here. Yes, it's the nuclear program, but it's also the missile program, which is, by the way, part of the nuclear program because Iran had been working on nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missiles that could one day reach the United States. So it's important that we nip this problem in the bud. And that's why I think the calculation from the Trump administration was at a time when the Islamic Republic of Iran is at its weakest point since 1979.
And in the last 48 hours, Iran has changed the rules of engagement. For the first time, we have seen strikes targeting energy facilities across Gulf countries. Why does this matter so much, Jason?
I think Iran is trying to expand the geography of the conflict and trying to inflict political, military, and economic costs on the United States in the hopes that by targeting these Gulf countries, that will pressure them to pressure the United States in turn to cut this campaign short. That's what you saw in the comments by the Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Larijani, who said that Iran is prepared for a long war. They think that the United States is not prepared for a long war and will lose patience and will to continue in dislodging the Iranian regime from power. This has been a calculation that has, been manifested over years of observing American retreat in the region, particularly dating back to the 1980s when there was the Marine barracks bombing in 1983. And instead of holding the Islamic Republic accountable directly on Iranian soil, the United States withdrew from Lebanon. So that memory is long in Iran, and that's what's motivating them to make this calculation. It's one of asymmetric endurance.
So it's really interesting. We talk about calculation and how long this could last. But I've listened to Donald Trump and I've listened to Pete Hegseth, and they don't seem to have a clear timeline of how long this could possibly last and what victory will look like for Donald Trump and what the end game is here.
Well, I think that the president seems to be preparing the American public for a longer campaign. I think you see this in his remarks. He's really not in a rush to speak with the current Iranian leadership. What he is going to do is focus on achieving the U.S. objectives, which are to degrade the power of the Islamic Republic of Iran to threaten the United States and its allies. And it's also leveling the playing field in the process between the Islamic Republic and the Iranian people who have been protesting against the abuses of the regime in the hopes that one day this regime falls.
The IAEA chief, he said today there's no indication of Iran's nuclear facilities being hit as the agency holds this emergency meeting that we've been seeing in Vienna. What more do we know about the situation in Iran and where the 440 kgs of enriched uranium at around 60% could be? Because these are the questions many people want answered.
Yes, I think that's a critical question. I think that there was some evidence that the stockpile of highly enriched uranium was buried under the rubble in Isfahan. And I think that that is absolutely a key objective, is to secure that stockpile. And so that's why you've seen public reports of the president and the Israelis even entertaining the possibility of deploying ground commandos to secure that material and to prevent it from being used by the Islamic Republic or other nefarious actors. So that's, I think, a key objective. Hitting nuclear sites and ensuring safeguarding that nuclear program is a key objective of this campaign. So I know that the IAEA Director General said that he didn't have evidence that nuclear sites have been hit, but I would be very surprised if by the end of this campaign there are not strikes on Iran's existing nuclear architecture, particularly Pickaxe Mountain, which is a hardened structure that the Islamic Republic has been drilling and creating in order to hide some of what its nuclear capabilities.
Is there still willingness by the Iranians to enter nuclear talks, as there were ongoing indirect negotiations ahead of the US and Israeli military campaign that we saw happen over the weekend? Because I think, and I guess many analysts are saying, that they're going to have to enter talks at some point.
I don't think the president's in a rush to enter talks with the Islamic Republic right now. I think the U.S. is concentrating on fulfilling its objectives as a part of Operation Epic Fury. I think that the Trump administration has come to the realization that as long as the current regime is in power and operating under this Khomeiniist-like dogma and ideology, the regime is not going to adhere to U.S. terms in these negotiations. But I think the president is keeping an open door in the very remote possibility that Iran does decide to dismantle its entire nuclear infrastructure and curtail its missile program and stop sponsoring terror proxies. But that would be effectively regime change by agreement. I think the Iranian regime is risking war by regime change because they think they have a better chance of surviving a military campaign, because they think the United States is going to cut it short due to a lack of political will in the United States. But I think President Trump is giving them a rude awakening with many of the risk-taking that he has undertaken since this weekend.
So, Jason, Donald Trump did a CNN interview just before I came on air with you, and he said big wave yet to come in the war with Iran. He said the biggest surprise has been Iran attacks against Arab countries. We're also just getting breaking news through now that Qatar says its forces shot down 2 aircraft coming from Iran. Do you think it's a fair assessment that the US completely underestimated what Iran was prepared to do in retaliation?
I don't think that the U.S. underestimated that. I think that the possibility of the U.S. hitting its Arab allies in response to strikes against the Iranian regime were always expected. This is part and parcel of Iranian behavior before. Let's not forget, in 2019, after the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, Iran started striking Saudi energy infrastructure. So this has been a long part of the Iranian playbook. And so I don't think that that was really a surprise by people who have been studying this for a long period of time. What has been a surprise, I would say, is the attacks against countries like Qatar and Oman, which have long held friendly relations with the Islamic Republic. They have served as diplomatic pressure valves for the Iranian regime and helped the system at critical junctures in its history. And now Iran is attacking them. So that is absolutely a game changer in what we are seeing.
And it's quite interesting because I'm here in Dubai, and we have obviously seen attacks on 5-star hotels and also across Dubai on certain ports that are here, which has been somewhat of a surprise to people living in the region, of course. But my big question here was, where do we go from here? Because right now, the US and Israel are launching attacks against Iran. Iran's retaliating. We're seeing Israel now going into Lebanon. So this conflict is widening.
It's widening because the Iranian regime is widening the conflict in order to try and deter and shorten the campaign. But I think the Iranian regime is being outmatched militarily. U.S. and Israel are demonstrating not only military and armed forces dominance, but also intelligence dominance against the Islamic Republic. And when President Trump previews that some of the biggest strikes are yet to come, the Iranian regime should wake up to that reality, because the decision makers in Iran have long known that the United States has the ability to unleash the wrath of God against the Islamic Republic. I think that may be coming, depending on the Iranian regime's next steps. And if they continue to strike our Gulf Arab partners, Iran, by striking our Gulf Arab partners, and also it struck a UK base in Cyprus. It's creating a coalition of countries to rally to the side of the United States and Israel at a time when Iran was trying to portray Israel as the biggest destabilizing force in the region. The Islamic Republic is totally undoing that posture that it held before this war. And so it's creating the very coalition that's going to result in its demise if it continues with this current pace of attacks and retaliations.
Jason Brodsky, as always, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
For more on this, I'm joined by Jotam Confino, author and Middle East correspondent. Jotam, thank you so much for joining me. Air raid sirens sounding across Israel today. Yesterday, we saw an attack on West Jerusalem, which killed 9 people. This is a real failure of Israel's Iron Dome, isn't it?
You can say that, but when you look at the amount of ballistic missiles that Israel has shut down, I wouldn't call it a failure. There's no air defense system in the world currently that can shoot down 100% of especially ballistic missiles, but rockets and missiles in general. It's still a very high percentage. And the fact that Israel is successful in shooting down most of these ballistic missiles is not just because of their own multi-layered air defense system. It's because the United States are helping them. And of course, you have regional allies that are also helping. Everyone's working together. It's quite extraordinary, really. But we've seen this before. We saw it last time Iran and Israel were at war. So I would say that even when you have mass casualties like you had yesterday, where 9 people were killed, and even if it's a tragedy, I still think that there is probably no other air defense system in the world other than the United States that can manage to successfully intercept that many ballistic missiles in such a short amount of time.
And several strikes have hit Beirut's southern suburbs after Israeli evacuation warnings. Who is Israel going to come up against? And could we see Israeli troops on the ground in Lebanon?
To answer your last question, I think it's a possibility. Firstly, because Israel now has a golden opportunity, an excuse to go in and finish what they didn't finish during the last war with Hezbollah. They hoped that the agreement they struck with the Lebanese government and, of course, Hezbollah and the United States and France, they hoped that the Lebanese army would be able to disarm Hezbollah. There was a mandate for them. There still is a mandate for them. They have the full backing of the US and France and, of course, Israel. But it has proven to be too big of a task for the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah, mainly because they don't want to do it. Hezbollah, they don't want to hand over their weapons. And the Lebanese army is not doing the same kind of cleanup like Israel did when they were in Lebanon. Israel literally went from building to building searching for weapons. The Lebanese army is not doing that. So currently there is an opportunity for Israel, now an excuse you can call it, to go in and finish what they started. I spoke to a source earlier today who's briefed on the operation, who told me that Israel is considering it. They're not ruling out sending troops into Lebanon. They have called up 110,000 reserve soldiers just in the past couple of days. In terms of what they're hitting in Beirut and in southern Lebanon, today so far, the Navy and the Israeli Air Force have struck 70 different sites weapon storages, ballistic missile launchers, but they also assassinated several Hezbollah members and apparently also an Islamic Jihad commander. They took out the head of the intelligence headquarters in Beirut, belonging to Hezbollah. And the defense minister has said that Naim Qassem, the leader of Hezbollah, is the next in line. So he will be assassinated too, most likely. So this is what they're doing. They're being very aggressive in their response to Hezbollah intervening now on behalf of the Iranian regime.
And Jotam, 4 US military personnel have died and many are seriously injured following US and Israeli attacks on Iran. As Israel carries out more attacks on Iran, and as you've just been speaking to me, Lebanon, is there concern of loss of life of Israeli military personnel?
There's always fear of loss of life, I would say, in particular when you're flying fighter jets deep into enemy territory. Now I'm talking about Iran, of course. Now, Israel has full air superiority over Iranian airspace, but it doesn't mean that there's no likelihood of an Israeli fighter jet somehow clashing or being downed somehow, friendly fire or failure, and landing in Iranian territory. That would be horrific because that pilot would be subject to immense torture and would be held by the Iranian regime. So yes, there's a likelihood of that. I would say the biggest likelihood of any casualties is inside Israel, of civilians. As you mentioned, the air defense system is not 100% secure. So 9 people just yesterday were killed in a ballistic missile attack in a residential area, which also destroyed a synagogue. That's the biggest threat. In terms of the soldiers, I think they're better equipped to handle themselves, especially when they're flying over other countries and their very advanced fighter jets inside Lebanon. If they start going in with troops, that's definitely going to be, there's going to be a possibility of casualties and losses of soldiers. We saw that during the Lebanon, the Hezbollah war, the last one, that many Israeli soldiers were killed in that war inside Lebanon.
And we heard from Pete Hegseth a little bit earlier on, and he didn't give a clear estimate of how long the Trump administration believes the war could continue. Is there broad support for a prolonged US-Israeli war right now, Jotam?
I'm not sure. Let's start with the Americans. I'm not sure the Americans are supporting a prolonged war. In fact, they don't want any war. They elected Donald Trump because he's the... He told his voters that he's not a wartime leader. He's not a warmonger. He doesn't want to start any wars. In fact, he wants to end wars. So I don't think there's a big support among Americans for this campaign in general, but also definitely not for a prolonged campaign, and definitely not for boots on the ground, which Donald Trump just told New York Post that he's not ruling out, which is to me shocking because that's the exact opposite of what he's been saying since he was elected and before that during his campaigning. In Israel, it's a completely different picture. Israelis have been living with the threat from Iran, the threat from all of the terror groups for decades. Countless lives have been lost on the Israeli side and of course also in other countries due to the Iranian regime. For them, it's now or never. There is a golden opportunity for them now to maybe not remove the regime altogether, but to degrade it in such a way that they simply don't pose a threat anymore, that they cannot fire ballistic missiles throughout the day. I can't count how many times I've been in a bomb shelter since Saturday morning. So has the rest of the population. And this is just something that's intolerable for Israelis. So therefore, they support a prolonged campaign to remove, not necessarily the regime, but remove the threat from the regime.
And Jotam, just looking more broadly, once we have seen the US-Israeli campaign end in Iran and in Lebanon, do you think Israel will be able to reshape the region? Is that what they're looking to do, reshape the region to make them safer, despite what other concerns other countries may have?
Yes, I believe Netanyahu already on October the 7th. He's a pretty clever man. Whether you like him or not, he's despicable in many ways, but he's very clever. He knew, I would say, he knew already on October 7th that this insane situation that Israel found itself in kind of opened the board. It gave Israel and Netanyahu the opportunity to reshuffle the board, which has happened since. Israel has decapitated the entire meaningful Hezbollah leadership. Hamas is still a shadow of its former self, even though they do control half of Gaza. Iran is crippled and now under immense fire from not only Israel, but also the United States. And Bashar al-Assad, which was an enemy of Israel, has fallen, even though the new regime led by Ahmed al-Shara is not necessarily an ally at all. He's still, I would say, someone that Israel could potentially actually work with. So I would say, generally speaking, Israel has managed to turn a horrendous failure, intelligence failure, a horrendous massacre into an opportunity to reshuffle the board. If they manage to remove the Iranian regime, which still seems very, not far-fetched, but it seems like it's going to happen down the line, further down the line, even if they don't manage to topple the regime, but they manage to remove their nuclear program and ballistic missile program and degrade it, generally, I would say that's a huge victory for Israel. But again, we're in the very early days of this campaign, and it remains to be seen, obviously, how far Israel and the United States are willing to go.
Jotam Confino, as always, take care and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has given his first remarks to reporters since the U.S.-Israeli military strikes on Iran at the weekend. Hegseth discussed a joint operation code-named Operation Roaring Lion by Israel and Epic Fury by the U.S. He claimed, "We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we're going to finish it." Take a listen.
This is not a so-called regime change war. But the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. Their war on Americans has become our retribution against their Ayatollah and his death cult. It took the 47th president, a fighter who always puts America first, to finally draw the line after 47 years of Iranian belligerence. He reminded the world, as he has time and time again, being an American means something unbreakable. If you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you.
We can now go live to Washington to speak to Ladan Yazdian, a former Iranian-American official. Ladan, it's great to have you on the show. How do you interpret Pete Hegseth's assertion that this is not a regime change war, even as he says the regime did change? And how might the message resonate inside of Iran?
Good afternoon, Leigh-Ann, and thanks for having me. I think Secretary Hegseth and other government officials, including President Trump, has laid out clear objectives for this operation, Operation Epic Fury, or as the Israelis say, Roaring Lion. For the first time, the interests of the Iranian people, the U.S. government, and the Israeli government have come together, and this is like an opportunity for change. The Secretary Hegseth stated clear objectives, which is eradicating Iran's nuclear program, missile sites, Iranian Navy, and IRGC bases. So basically, Iran's offensive capabilities are going to be eliminated based on what he said. And also, there is no nation building, as he said. There is no democracy building or sending troops there. So it's a very clear objective based on what we hear and what we heard from the news conference today.
And it's really interesting because Donald Trump says he won't rule out boots on the ground in Iran, and that's according to the New York Post. We just got those lines in the last hour or so. But Pete Hegseth pushed back on fears of a drawn-out war, saying this is not Iraq, this is not endless. And it's really interesting because you said Hegseth gave clear objectives, but with no defined exit plan, could this evolve into something far larger?
That's a good question. It could evolve based on the response from the Iranian side. So this is an operation, in my view, with clear objectives. Getting rid of Iran's offensive capability, which is obviously a threat to Iran's neighbors, Israel and the United States. And it has been, but no U.S. president has wanted to basically get involved in any kind of operation against Iran because it is costly. It may cost human lives. U.S. Service members, which we lost 4 service members, sadly. And also the cost of war, the cost of energy prices going up. All of those are what the U.S. presidents would consider when they engage in operations such as this. However, as I said, this is what the president has decided. This is what it has come to. Obviously, the negotiations were not fruitful in a way that the Americans wanted, and it felt like it was just the Iranian side dragging their feet, even though some say it was actually successful. I really don't believe the Iranian side wanted to give away their entire nuclear program or basically come to agreement on the missile issue or any other proxy issues and such.
So we talk about the loss of life, and the Iranian Red Crescent says 555 people, have been killed in the country since these attacks by the US and Israel. But I want to know, do you think that Hegseth and President Trump actually thought about the ramifications on Arab countries and as many as 706 total attacks on the UAE? And we're just getting some news lines from Iran. The Iran Revolutionary Guard says another wave of attacks launched. Iran media says new missiles are being used.
Leigh-Ann, the Iranian government and the IRGC had stated in advance that there will be implications if they were attacked on the Arab neighbors, on the U.S. bases overseas and in the region. So I am not surprised to see this. The objective of the Islamic Republic by these attacks is to create chaos, to create instability in the region, and just change the dynamics, widen up the geography of war. This is very important. And it actually, I believe in the long run, it will backfire. Even in the short run, it has already backfired because many nations, including the European countries, have joined or they are intending to join the American side on the defense of their allies in the region. I don't think this is this was actually a very crazy move. However, we know what Iran's objectives is. They just want to shorten the attacks. They want the neighboring nations to complain to the American side to stop the war, because Iran, as we see, is not a match for U.S. forces.
And
so I think...
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
I just wanted to ask one last question. 4 American troops have been killed with expectations of more losses. If military caskets start returning home, could this foreign policy gamble derail Republican chances of holding onto control of Congress at the midterm elections that are upcoming?
That's a good point. Very sad to hear about the 4 service members killed. However, they were killed in Camp Arifjan, which hosts over thousands of U.S. service members. And obviously, Iran attacking U.S. bases has implications. However, the Congress has the right to ask the president how long the war is going to last. And I think today and tomorrow, Secretary Rubio and other members of the U.S. governments will answer those questions, show evidence not only to the group of 8, but to the entire Congress. They have to discuss this. This is what happens in a democracy. However, I believe this the conflict is not going to last over 60 days. If it lasts over 60 days, it requires a Congress authorization. However, based on what President Trump has said, it's going to be about 4 weeks.
Ladan, Yazdian, thank you so much for your time with me today.
Thank you.
China says it will step up measures to protect its citizens in Iran as the situation evolves following US and Israel military strikes. Beijing has called for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation, urging all sides to return to diplomatic talks to prevent a wider regional conflict. Patrick Falk has this report.
Well, China has issued evacuation advisories for its citizens in Iran and Israel as retaliatory strikes and instability have disrupted travel and prompted flight cancellations. Earlier today, the Foreign Ministry told citizens to strengthen personal precautions and to evacuate safely as soon as possible. Reports say more than 3,000 Chinese nationals have been evacuated so far from Iran. Beijing also confirmed that one of its citizens was killed as a result of the conflict. China has described the attacks as unacceptable, a violation of sovereignty and international law, and called on parties to respect the security interests of all Gulf states. While condemning the violence, China has stopped short of offering military support to Tehran, instead emphasizing the need for political solutions. Analysts say Beijing's response reflects its broader approach, maintaining strategic ties with Iran, protecting its energy and economic interests, and positioning itself as a broker of stability rather than escalation. That balancing act comes as the conflict is already affecting global markets and cross-border investment activity. Financial firms with Middle East operations, including some with Chinese interests, have postponed travel and deals amid security concerns, highlighting how the crisis is rippling into economic and commercial relationships. China's calibrated stance suggests it is wary of being drawn into the conflict, even as it presses for a ceasefire and greater diplomatic engagement to avoid further regional spillover.
Now, global oil prices have risen as Iran continues to launch strikes across the Middle East in response to ongoing attacks by the US and Israel. Brent crude has jumped by 10% to around $82 a barrel. That's after at least 3 ships were attacked near the Strait of Hormuz. Shares in airlines also fallen after airspace was closed across the Middle East. Let's speak to economist Vicky Pryce. Vicky, thank you so much for joining us. Qatar has halted LNG output after Iranian drone strikes on key energy facilities there. What impact has this had on European gas prices, and what wider impact could it have?
Well, we've seen gas prices rise quite significantly, and I think that is a serious problem because it depends, of course, on how long that is going to continue. Europe depends very significantly on LNG inputs from Qatar and elsewhere in the region, but mainly Qatar. So what is going to have to happen is that they get that energy from somewhere else. And we know that even since the war in Ukraine, what they have been doing is get more LNG from the US. And prices, of course, are going to reflect that. And so I think there will be a destabilization, if you like, in terms of the normal trade patterns, and that's going to have to happen.
And Vicky, oil prices also rose as much as 13% today, but actually pared back some of those gains after a steep surge we saw in the Asia trading as the Iran conflict disrupts these flows in the Middle East. Does this reflect uncertainty in the markets at the moment?
It certainly does. I mean, what we've seen, of course, is that there's been a rethink of exactly where we stand in terms of oil reserves. And also, interestingly enough, in Europe, the expectation is that there's going to be, and generally also in the US, in the East Coast, a slightly warmer March, which means that perhaps not as much oil may be required in the future as would otherwise perhaps have been the case. So, and of course, we've also had the announcement by OPEC that there would be an increase in production from April. That, of course, will take a little bit of time before it has an impact, but nevertheless, it's quite important. So the markets are rethinking. A lot will depend on how long all this lasts. So the markets are not panicking, but they are indicating that there will be some issues if this doesn't get resolved soonish.
And the Strait of Hormuz is the pinch point for the global economy. Lots of vessels are anchored in that waterway as I speak to you. An oil tanker has also been attacked in the Gulf of Oman and multiple energy facilities across the region. Could this make prices at the petrol pumps higher for people in the US and all over the world?
Yes, people are already calculating what it would mean if prices stay as they are now or if they go up higher. I mean, of course, we have things to compare against, which was indeed the war in Ukraine and also what happened a couple of years ago in the region as well. So prices were and considerably higher, went up a lot faster and stayed high for some time. This isn't anything like that increase that we saw then on those two previous occasions, which suggests that perhaps the markets are just waiting to see. But there is no doubt that if prices stay as they are or start increasing, then it will be felt in terms of the cost of living for people, because they have to pay a little bit more in terms of gasoline prices. But we do know that some 20% of all oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. But there is another issue, which is that lots of container ships also have not been able to do anything. They're waiting there to make sure that there is a sort of clear passage across. We have seen in previous crises, and we saw that again after COVID and after the war in Ukraine started, that container ships, the freight rates went up very significantly. That increased costs for anyone who was expecting things to be delivered. And then also prices in the shops went up. And there is a clear correlation between the time that it takes if you divert ships to go in a different route to get the deliveries to come in and CPI, consumer price inflation. And that's a problem because everyone's been waiting for lower interest rates, for inflation to come down and really help. And growth forecasts have been adjusted accordingly. Well, all that needs to be rethought.
And it's really interesting because I want to pick up on that point because we're talking about the Middle East. We've spoken about oil and energy, but the Middle East isn't just about oil and energy. Of course, it's about trade, what you're just talking about. And it's also about tourism. And we've seen some of the big international airports, like in Dubai, one of the busiest in the world, that's been shut, apparently limited flights to begin again tomorrow. But what impact does this also have?
We've seen that, of course, reflected in stock prices. Big airlines are seeing their prices fall quite significantly, and that's a problem. And tourism is one, as you rightly suggest, that is going to be affected. And we've seen tour operators, their stock prices go down as well. And I think people will rethink perhaps where they go on holiday or where they go and move to. And it's interesting, of course, I'm talking to you from the UK, where loads of people have relocated to places like Dubai and elsewhere. And the question is that trend going to continue, or are we going to see a rethink?
And it's really interesting because I'm talking to you from Dubai and relocated from the UK. So economist Vicky Pryce, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I just want to bring you some breaking news. Donald Trump is speaking and he says U.S. continues to carry out large-scale combat operations. Trump says Iran refused to cease its pursuit of nuclear weapons. That is Donald Trump, the President of the United States, speaking live now following those U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran over the weekend. More on that developing story throughout the evening. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X, and we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.